Good morning, everybody. As we go to the chitas of today, we're holding in the portion of Vayikra. We're holding the third reading. Today is Tuesday. We're holding the third reading in that portion. So we are holding on chapter 1, chapter 2, actually, verse number 7. If your sacrifice is a grain offering in a deep frying pan, Soilas Bashem and Teasa, it needs to be made out of fine flour with oil. Rashi says Marcheshes is a vessel that was used in the Beis Hamikdash. It was deep. Because it was deep, the oil amassed, and thus the fire did not burn it. Therefore, the grain offering made inside it quivered, reichshin. Anything soft and elastic due to the liquid inside it appears to though it quivers and shakes. Well, like a cooking kind of situation. You shall bring for this grain offering will be made of these preparations of flowers, and you shall bring it to the kohen elamazbeach, to the altar. Now she says one of these different types of grain offering, the owner to the priest, the gisha, and he must bring it the priest, the gisha elamazbeach. He would bring it to the southwest corner of the altar. Will uplift from this mincha askarasa. It's a remembrance, a memorial feast. He takes that fist of matzah, and he brings it on his mizbeach. It's a fire offering pleasing to God. That's askarasa. What means it's memorial portion? This refers to the fistful. Verse number 10. And anything left over from that mincha. It's all given to Aaron and his sons. Kodesh Kadoshim, this was holy of holies, Me'ishi Hashem, from the offering, fire offering of God. Verse 11. Kol hamincha, any mincha that was brought to the Eibishter, was brought as a carbon, was not allowed to be chametz. It was allowed to be unleavened bread. Yichol serve a chol devash, was any leavening agent or sweet fruit. L'saktino and meno ish Hashem. You're not allowed to bring it as an offering to God. Now she said any or honey, any sweet fruit is called dvash. So the flour had to always be mixed with water. It couldn't be mixed with juices. Verse number 12. Of them, you must bring to God an offering of the first of your produce. But not supposed to ascend to the altar of God. Rashi says Rashi, what the meaning of the verse is, because there was a time that chametz was brought to the Beis Hamikdash. That was called the shtei lechem, two breads that was on Shavuos. You must bring an offering the first. You must bring from leavening agents or sweet fruit the offering of the first produce, meaning the 2 loaves of atzeres, Shavuos, that were brought from leaven. So there were one time a year that chametz was brought, and that was on Shavuos. It's called the shtei halechem, the 2 breads. And he brought the bikurim, so the silas, the chitim, he brought it for the 7 fruits that Yisrael was blessed with, and that was one of the things was flour, and that was flour bread. They made chalas, it was called two show breads that the Yidden brought, and that was brought to the first ripening of the bikurim, the sweet fruit, such as the first ripening of figs and dates, was also brought. That was the only time that fruits were brought to the Beis Hamikdash as an offering, was the bikurim, was the first fruits. Like this, there was no thing as bringing fruits to the Beis Hamikdash. Verse number 13. And you must have salt in every grain offering. And you must never omit salt from God's covenant. from your meal grain offerings. I'll call korbanecha, not only on your grain offerings, but on every carbon that you brought, animal offering. Takiv melech, you have to have salt. Why? So that's just for covenant was made with the salt already in the sixth day of creation, actually the second day when God separated the waters, that the lower waters were promised to be offered on the altar as salt. And as the water libation of the festival of Sukkot, so they made a back with salt, do lower water, especially the lowest water, which is the Yam HaMelech salt water. That there would always be salt, and that's one of the reasons we always have salt on our table. Al kol korbanecha, as she says, al elos behema va'if and munkal kachin, on the all animal offerings there was always salt. There was actually a room in the Beis Hamikdash was called the room of the salt. There was always salt there ready to be put on the mizbeach. Verse number 14, Im takem minchas bikudim lashem. When you bring the grain offering, first grains to the God, Aviv, you must bring Aviv kolabeish. You must bring in the first grain offering as soon as it ripens. You roast it over the fire as a full-grown husk. As she says, talking here about, so let's see, here's an example, in being used as when. For this offering is not optional. This was the offering of the Omer on Pesach, the second day of Pesach. There's a verse, what's im, if? It's when. It's not if. Since the verse is speaking of the grain offering of the Omer, which is obligation. Similarly, we find im used in the sense, the im yeh hayovel, if the yovel will happen, if. Every 50 years, yovel. So im can be if, and im also in the pasuk can be when. Minchas bikurim, the grain offering of the first grains. Today is speaking about the grain offering of the Omer, which is brought in the Aviv, at the time of the ripening of the produce, and it is brought from barley. This is the only time that barley was brought in the Beis Hamikdash, was the Omer offering. And it says Aviv, and elsewhere it says, and since barley was ripened in Aviv, kolabeish, roasted over fire, it was dried over fire in a perforated vessel for parching grain, or otherwise it could not have been ground in the mill since it's moist. Gadish caramel means coarsely ground while still moist. Gadish has a connotation of breaking and grinding. He would grind it in the grit mill. Similar form, he broke by a Gadish with the gavel. My soul breaks Gorsa. Caramel, while it's in the husk, still full. Meaning when the grain is moist and full in the stalks, and thus the fresh ears are called caramel. Similarly, we find the word, the fresh grain in Malachim, we find the fresh grain caramel in their husks. This was the first that we used to go out on the second day of Pesach, and they used to cut the barley. This was the difference between the Yoshan and the Chodosh, the grains of the past year, the grains of this year, the present year. Verse 15. Satolel shemen, you shall put oil upon this mixture. Samtolel levena, you shall put the grain, you shall put the levena, frankincense upon it. Minchahi, this is a grain offering of barley. Then the priest must burn up its menorah fistful from its grounded flour and its oil. Alcohol along with all the frankincense. Ishe Lashem, this is a fire offering to God. And here we have finished the Chumash for today. Now go to the Tanya of the day. Holding the 38th chapter of Tanya. So here we go. Let's learn. It's axiomatic that the physical is incompatible to the spiritual. So much so that the philosophers agree that the evolution of the material from the spiritual is the most radical form of creation. Because how do we go from spiritual to physical? They're two opposites. The body being physical is thus incompatible to the soul, which is spiritual. There's no comparison to the two. That's why, again, we say every morning, the miracles of all miracles that happens every day is that God brings down my neshama, which is spiritual, into my body, which is spiritual. Zaito bi nishmasi. One of the greatest miracles that happens every day, that God forces this spiritual soul to become part of this physical body, which is a miracle. The difference between them is obviously due to the difference between the respective divine life force creating them. Really no difference by God between the soul and the body. They're both a creation. The difference is that in the soul is spiritual, meaning that it reveals spirituality in it's a vessel for spirituality. And therefore it reveals it. And therefore you don't see the physical in it. At least humans cannot see the physical in it. And the body, you see more the physical. Difference surely, now one varying degrees of revelation of the divine life force that's in its body. This life force is in concealment. While in the soul, it stands revealed. And that's really the difference. That's this respect. Body and soul are alike. The veil of Klippas Nega, which obscures the godness in this physical world, is the world as a whole, envelops both body and soul. If also the body does not attest the fact that it is a product of divine creative powers, so too does the soul of a living creature react to the fact that its life-giving properties are godly. Thus, the divine life force is concealed equally in the body and the soul, especially in the vivifying soul. The difference between them lies rather in the intensity of God's life force that each contains. The body life force is contracted, so their body is a physical being. The soul, the life force, is freely bestowed, and the soul is therefore a spiritual life-giving being. And that's the difference. So that's the Rebbe's words. In terms of concealment of God, meaning the degree in which the continence of the inner aspect of the divine life force is concealed, the light, meaning the divine creative life force, is shava, bechinas hesta upon him, is both the same in the body and in the soul. It's concealed equally in both. Question: how much is it concealed? Vushim, shavim, and the garments in which the light hides are equal also. Because it's clothed in itself identical in the body and the soul. The concept of a garment is an aspect of a shield that is hiding something. Both the body and soul are of this world. Where throughout the world and all its creatures, spiritual as well as physical, light and the life force issuing from the breath of God's mouth is equally concealed. It's concealed. Everything is concealed. Nothing sees Pnei Hashem. The verse says, as God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, that there's no capability to anything to see the essence of God and to exist. They would lose their total existence. They would become part of God's existence. So therefore, everything in life, everything from the higher worlds to the lower worlds needs to go through a tzimtzum. That's the concept of the whole concept of Kabbalah. And considers the aspect of this contraction. Everything needs to be contracted. To be able to be a reality, they have to have a veil, so to say, that contracts, that hides the light of God. And therefore, ultimately, everything comes through this veil. This hesta upon him, which is the concept of the concealment, the hiding of God's face. You read this Hamadregas and the descent of the life force. From the numerous, from level to level, by the numerous tzimtzum, powerful contractions. Tzimtzum and Ramatzum, through the various levels constituting the chain-like success of the world. Until this light comes into the klippa, comes into a covering that shines. To give life to the totality of this material world. So again, the Alter Rebbe has described the process whereby the divine life force descends, the whole concept of Seder Shtalshus, the concept of the world of descent, which is a very deep concept in Chassidus, godly origin to the point where it creates and gives life to the physical matter, meaning from the breath of God's mouth, a reference to Malchus of the world of Atzilus, to the world of materiality, which is the world of Siyah. He defines the various steps in this process. Number one, it's a descent from level to level. That's ilu va'alu, chain-like descent. Number two, it's numerous tzimtzum. There's a lot of contractions. Number three, not only numerous, they're powerful tzimtzum. And number four, clothing itself ultimately in kilpas noiga. Clothing it ultimately in what's expressed in the Torah as the first tree of good and evil. Eitz hadas toivara, a tree of good and evil. Klippas noiga. That is the symbolic concept of this aspect. The Eibishter coming into a situation where there's a capability of good and evil to come together. That's klippas noiga, a covering, but it has the capability to shine. You have a situation where good and evil can, in a way, deal with one another. Examine them individually. The Rebbe's interpretation over here, descent from level to level, to reach down to the level of Asiya, to the world of action. The life force must first descend from the world of Atzilus to the world of Bria, then to the world of Yetzirah, and follow to the world of Yesiyah. Within each of these worlds, there are many levels, and the life force must descend through them, all before reaching the next world. Then the numerous tzimtzum. Each descent of the life force entails a contraction of the light, and the life force lessening its intensity. That's tzimtzum. By the descent of the tzimtzum alone, no matter how numerous, will not make a possible creation of a physical being. The divine life force would still be a level where anything created would be spiritual. It would become a spiritual being, albeit a lower grade of spirituality. Creation of physical matter proposes another condition, and that's a powerful tzimtzum. Tzimtzum which entirely changes the character of the life force, not only in its intensity, to the point where it can create and give life to material beings. So that's the tzimtzum gedolim, great contractions. It's actually through the contraction, it changes in a way this. And now, but when this type of tzimtzum, but even this type of tzimtzum cannot produce a world like ours, in which it not appeared that God created, and where in fact God's creation can be used to find his will. This is achieved only when the life force clothes itself in klippas noiga. That's, you understand why these steps are brought in Kabbalah. Ultimately, we got to come to the lowest concept. And that's the aspect we learned many times in the concept of klippas noiga. A garment, a klippa is a covering that shines. And thereby, also in other klippas, as will soon be explained, as I find in the first chapter of Tanya, klippas noiga is a mixture of good and evil. Therefore, whatever receives its godly force through the veil of klippas noiga, in which the life force is closed, can be utilized either for a holy purpose and serving God, God's will, through performing a mitzvah, or for unholy purpose, in violating ultimately God's will through a sinful act. So ultimately, it has to come down in a situation where good and evil are united. And that is klippas noiga. And therefore, now you're given the free will. to take this object, either use it for the mitzvah. So like, for example, you have food in front of you, you can make a bracha on it, or you don't have to make a bracha. You think you don't have to make a bracha. And when you make a bracha, you elevate this food. You don't make a bracha, God forbid, you don't elevate the food. The food is food. It's like any other inanimate object. So it's called, if you don't talk divrei Torah, the Mishnah says, if one doesn't connect anything holy with the food, like the eating from the dead, that's how the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos expresses it. Basically, you've taken away, it's like any other inanimate object. It's a vegetation or that has been cut off from its source. So basically, it's inanimate object, dead object. If I make a bracha on it, or I use it for the learning of Torah, or even I sit at the table and as I'm eating, I talk divrei Torah, now I have elevated the food. I've not only elevated myself, I've elevated the food. Because the food is klippas noiga. I have to look at everything as the capability of using it out for kedusha, for something good, or the capability of using it out for nothing, which nothing in Chassidus and Torah is also not good. For everything God created is for a purpose. And therefore, I can use it out in a purposeful way or not. Summary. Through the many descents and powerful tzumtzum, God's life force encloses itself in klippas noiga, and thereby gives the life to all creators of the world. And that's it. That's how Chassidus Kabbalah explains it in very short, even though we can go in depth and we can talk about this for many, many years. And to explain these concepts of the concept of Seder Shtalshlus, from Ein Sof, from the infinite light to klippas noiga. Alter Rebbe now distinguishes between a permitted and prohibited object. But now we have in klippas noiga, we have sholosh klippas atmeis, which was brought down in the beginning of Tanya also. We go from klippas noiga, from the concept of good and evil. As you know, that even the first tree that was called Eitz Hadas, that tree that was called Tevara, a tree of good and bad, that ultimately they could have used it out for good. They just would have waited for a couple of hours, they would actually use it out for Kedusha. Instead of Shabbos, they could have used it out for the Shabbos. They decided to use it out for mundane. And that's what brought it down to a sin. That's what brought it down to what's called in Chassidus, Shalish Klippas Atmeis, 3 levels of impurity. And that's how we go from the next level to the lowest level of Tumah. So the Alter Rebbe, we go to the Alter Rebbe, now the Alter Rebbe is between the permitted, forbidden object. The former received the life force directly from klippas noiga. The latter received the godly life force clothing klippas noiga. First descends still further to be veiled in the 3 impure klippas. This means all things in the world that are permitted and pure receive the vitality direct via klippas noiga, and through klippas noiga evolves varam hatmeim, all impure, forbidden things. Because the klippas noiga is the middle rung. So for klippas noiga, for good and bad, ultimately, since there is some aspect of the capability of negativity, so that gives the life force to the negativity. When I drag it down to impure things, all impure things which derive vitality from the impure klippas, yet the vitality too stems from the noiga, since it's an intermediary level between the wholeness where the life originates and the 3 impure klippas as mentioned above. So we can conclude from this that there is no difference between the life force of the soul and that of the body in terms of revelation or concealment, since both body and soul in this world, the life force is equally concealed in the veil of klippas noiga. So everything ultimately comes from this tree of klippas noiga, from this concept of good and evil, for the concept of this klippa that gives the capability for both levels, the concept of creating this kedusha, and for the concept of chas v'shalom becoming connected to ultimately to impurity. Nevertheless, nevertheless, the godly illumination, meaning flow of the vitality in which God illuminates and gives life to all creatures of this world by the way of this garment, klipas nega, is ultimately a neshava bechulam bebechinas tzimtzum v'shpashus. Ultimately, not all the same from them all, and the difference between the life force and the various creatures in terms of contraction and expansion. In some creatures, the life force is contracted and limited. In other creatures, finds a broader expression. That's the difference. The difference is ultimately the way this klipas nega is used, and the way we ultimately create the right vessel for this klippa to be able to either shine or not shine. So that the difference between the concealment, hester, and the life force of the life force and the contraction, tzimtzum, can be expressed as follows. Suppose one hangs a thick curtain on a window to screen the sunlight. The light entering the room through the curtain will be entirely different quality. In fact, it might be described as a mere echo of the original light. This is concealment. On the other hand, one boards up the window and leaves a teeny hole by which the light may pass. The light shining through the hole, though greatly restricted, will be the same qualitatively as the original light that is meant by this contraction. So too with regard to our subject. Klipas nega is a thick curtain which veils divine creative power, quality from all creatures of the world. This curtain light varies, however, from one creature to another in the degree of the contraction. The question is how big the light, how big the hole, how big the hole is. How big the hole is. How big the contraction is. So you have the concept of concealment is equally by everybody. It's all a concealment. The original light is not here. Well, not the original light. The essence of the light is not here. The question is how big the contraction is. So is it a hestaponim? Is it a concept of a hidden thing to everybody? Yes. As Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that God should reveal himself, and God answered, it's impossible for the essence of God to be revealed and anything to be existence, anything to exist. Therefore, there needs to be the concept of Hester. I will hide myself. But then there's a concept of contraction. And the concept of contraction is different. The way God contracts himself to a stone, the way he contracts himself to a vegetation, the way he ultimately contracts himself to an animal, and then there's the concept of the contraction to a human being. And now in the human being itself, it depends on how much the human being wants to have this contraction. How big of a hole does he want to create so that the light should come into his existence? And that's why the expression in the brought down, the expression is open me up a little hole and I will give you a wide response. So we have to create that the contraction that this veil makes shouldn't be such a great contraction that we need to limitize the contraction. That's Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's where we learn the concept. The Mitzrayim is a contraction. Meitzah is a contraction. Meitzah means not, when you have a situation that's not wide, very narrow. So you have a very narrow hole. You have to break the Mitzrayim. We have to break this contraction. We have to open up the hole. We have to open up this hole, meaning we have to create a vessel within us that can handle more light, that can handle greater revelation. Will we merit to see the essence? No, Mashiach, that's what it says, Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, then we'll merit to be able to see the veil will disappear. And when the veil disappears, now you be able to see the essence. Whatever that means that Mashiach comes, we'll see the essence. But that ends the Tanya of today. Today is the third day of the month, which is chapter 18 to chapter 22. If you do those chapters from chapter 18 to chapter 22, you do the chitas of the day. I will say the Hayom Yom for today, for the third day of Nisan. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the People's Rebbe, talks about his father's Torah study. Rebbe Rashab, fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe. Amongst my father's regular Torah study sessions, he would learn a parsha of Chumash with Rashi daily. Chitas. Reciting Tanakh by heart, a chapter each of Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, a chapter of Mishnayos, a regular session in profound study of Gemara, at least 2 pages weekly, another in rapid study of Gemara, 3 pages daily, a session of study in the Jerusalem Talmud, a regular period for codes of Jewish law, not daily. During the course of the year, he would conclude the entire Medrash Rabbah, borrowing from the long sedras and repaying it in the short sedras. Meaning that he did not necessarily conclude each weekly Medrash portion that week. You conclude the lengthier portion during another week, and when the portion was more brief ones. It's just interesting that the Rebbe Rashab would learn Medrash Rabbah, and I always tell people that they should learn the Medrash. Today you combine the Medrash Rabbah. It's a big set. Art School gave out the Medrash Rabbah in English on the Parsha. And if you learn Medrash Rabbah on the portion, it's going to give you a whole different picture to the portion that you are learning. So the Rebbe Rashab would learn the Medrash Rabbah. He would learn every another Parsha week. He would learn the Medrash Rabbah every week. Easy. Okay. That completes our learning today. And Mitzshem will continue tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Bezat Hashem. I want to wish you all a wonderful day, a happy day, and a healthy day.